All right, so I'm going to go ahead and import into my characters folder, my cloud. So I'm going to go to import new asset, navigate to my letter drop game, and just select the cloud. Now, you might be like, well, isn't a cloud like an enemy? You could make a folder called an NPC, and that's non-playable characters, and the one called playable characters. You might be also wondering, like, isn't this an environment asset because it's a cloud? Generally, the way I look at it is if it has any interaction with a character, like it's a mushroom in Mario Brothers, and you have to squash it, and it has a possibility of interacting and attacking or talking to. And this one has a face, so I could later create a dialogue system and have this cloud talk to our character. But really, overall, yeah. So that's the reason why I have it. So I'm gonna go ahead and drag this cloud on top of the canvas here, and I'm just going to move it up in the air. So this is going to be its position. And we'll have a movement script for this as well. But for now, we want to just have a script that controls the letter dropping. And so let's go ahead and take a look at creating that script. All right, so I'm actually thinking maybe we'll break these. So there's this, it's called single responsibility theory, I believe. Sorry, single responsibility principle. And what that is you want to break everything down, each function, each class, all this stuff to handle certain things so the code is cleaner. And if you pass it on to another designer or programmer, they can easily read it. In my sense, tech artist. So let's go ahead and actually create a script. And in this one, I'm just going to call this letter. And this is going to handle our letters. And I'm going to make this a very simple script. And within this is going to help us to deal with our Text Mesh Pro object, which is, if you're not familiar with it, I'm going to right click in here and I'm going to go to UI and I'm just going to add some new text, but I'm going to add this Text Mesh Pro. And really it's just a component where it helps you create beautiful text. So you can see here's this Text Mesh Pro object here. And this will handle like letters dropping from the scene. On our cloud, I want to make a child object. That means an object that's connected to it. And it's just going to be an empty game object. So I'm going to create an empty object here. And I'm going to place a little bit. And this is actually going to be our letter spawner. So let's go ahead and rename this letter spawner. And this is where our letters are going to spawn out of to fall down to let our little guy catch it. And actually, let's move him a little bit lower down, a little bit lower on our screen. There we go. All right, so I'm going to double click this letter script. All right, so there's a couple of things we need right away. We need to figure out, since this is going to be handling our letters, the speed in which those letters drop. Okay, so we can do that with a standard public float. And remember that we're also made this public so that we can access that speed. Let the designer or us or whoever is accessing the speed in which those letters drop. And over time, with each level, we can increase the speed of that to build, more fun and more, a little bit more difficulty for our players. The next thing we want to do is get a reference to our using our Text Mesh Pro component. So I have this using directive here. And right now it's not being used. That's why it's grayed out. So let me go ahead and type that code out. I'm going to place it below here. You know what? Let's go ahead and make this public as well. So this is just a variable and it stores anything. It's called text mesh and it's going to store a reference to this Text Mesh Pro UGUI reference. Now, if we look at our Text Mesh Pro object, this is the component that we're trying to access. And you could see here that we don't have access. So we could drag it in and just drop it. But what I want to do is have it every single time find this component. This is the this GUI element. I want it to find it every single time. And let's see. Yeah, I want it to find this element. This is where we're typing our letter and updating it and stuff automatically and place it in there. So that's why in start, I'm going to have it get the component. So down in start, I have text mesh here, which equals get component text mesh pro UGUI. So I'm going to save this. Now, as a refresher, for those of you who had me before, what this does is it's going to grab this component and automatically insert it into the variable slot so that we don't have to keep dragging it in or if it breaks connection on our prefab. So it's built right into the code that it's grabbing or getting that component and placing it in there. And now we're using text mesh. I can access all of the cool features in here, like adding text, doing things like that. Now, what I want to do down here is I want to create a custom function. And what this is going to do is allow us to set a letter. So if they enter E, A, whatever, And then it's going to take that letter and convert it to a string. So in case it becomes a paragraph, like a word or whatever, so that we could also display it in our scene as we actually export it. So I'm going to go ahead and type that method out for you. All right, so here we have this public, and the reason why this method is public is because we're going to be accessing it from our letter spawner script, and we're going to be feeding letters into here. And as the letters come in, we're going to check if text mesh is equal to null, not equal to null, which means we don't have any letters, we didn't input anything. That means we have letters. We're going to feed that into the text, which is this field here, text mesh text input. We're going to feed it right into there, and then we're going to convert it to a string. Now in our update function, what we're going to do is we're actually going to handle the translation of those letters coming down. All right, so here you can see we have transform.translate, and we're getting our vector3.now, which is really the same way of, remember we do the X, Y, and Z axis. This is sort of a more compact way. So we're saying we're going to go down in the Y axis, and we're going to multiply that by 5, which is the drop speed that we inputted above here. And then we're just normalizing it by going time.delta time. Now down here is where we're going to add extra stuff like collision handling. Maybe we'll have a score manager, things like that, or we're going to have a letter spawner and a letter manager and all that good stuff. But really, this can almost serve as a letter manager. But we want to keep this code kind of simple. And if you enjoy this, keep doing more and more of the tutorials and learning on your own. But anyway, it handles overall all the interactions with this letter. So I created another script called letter spawner. There's nothing in there. And just as a refresher, you just right click, create C# script. And I named it letter spawner. And that's right here. The video actually cut out, stop recording. Not a perfect process, but this is going to handle exactly what it says. It's going to spawn our letters. So the first thing we need to do is get access to our public game object, which is our letter prefab. So let me go ahead and type that. All right, so we have this public, it's a game object, and it's our letter prefab. And I don't remember, sorry, I'm kind of jumping between cuts here. I grabbed my letter text here, and this letter text object, and I dragged it into our my prefab folder, just dragged and dropped it in here. And what this is this created the prefab that we can use over and over again. And all this prefab has, if you remember, it has nothing but this letter script on there. That's all we added to it. So now with our letter spawner here, which is attached to our cloud, I'm going to grab this letter spawner and drop it on here. And I can actually delete this letter text from our spine now. And here's our letter spawner. And I'm going to grab this letter text and I'm going to just drop it inside of here. And now we have access to that. Now we haven't instantiated it yet. We're going to do that in a little bit. So let's save this and let's go back to our script writer or Visual Studio. And let's add 2 more variables. One is going to be the spawn rate, and the other one is the time to spawn the next one. So spawn rate is really the speed in which they spawn. And then we have to save the time. So it's a little bit of kind of like some math that we're going to do. Let me pause the video and put them in there. All right, so you can see here we have our spawn rate, and we have the time, the next spawn time in which that we're going to do it. So these are, I'm going to set them both to public so we can adjust that, even though we're going to add value to this in here. Now, the next thing we need is some sort of word. I'm going to make this a public string, and it's going to be whatever the word is that we want them to spell on the first level. It could be just finding a bunch of letters if it's depending on the level in school. But right now, we're going to go with a word, and it's just going to be example. All right, so we have a public string here, which we can change, and hence why we made it public, and we call it current word, and it's example. So I'm going to save this and show you how that looks inside of the editor. But here's our letter spawner, and you can see here's example, here's our spawn rate, here's our next spawn time. Now let's do some math inside of our update function. And I don't know if I'm going to be using start right now, so I'm just going to delete this to clean up our code a little bit. And so inside of our update function here, I'm just going to do some very basic math. I'm going to do an if check. And what this is going to check is if the time, this is our current time. So all you do is you write time, that time. So we're checking our current time is greater than or equal to the time that we enter, which is next spawn time, which right now is 0. So this is if the current time is greater than or equal to 0, which it's going to be, we want to spawn a letter. So let's make a method here called void spawn letter. So we're going to call this spawn letter, and this spawn letter method is really going to be responsible for spawning or instantiating our letter. Now remember, update runs every frame. So this is a great way of checking time. There's certainly more performant ways, but this is a good way, especially when you're prototyping out your levels. And so what we're going to do down here is we're going to essentially schedule the next spawn time. So we might be like, okay, well, next spawn time is set to 0. So what it's going to be equal to whatever the current time is plus our spawn rate. Remember, our spawn rate here is how fast or how often we want our letters to be spawned in seconds. Well, we could say every 2 seconds here. If we want it to be every 1 second. And like I said, you could always adjust this for level of difficulty as your game progresses. And this is also helping us, because it's checking every frame, is to reset this to check if our current time is greater than our spawn time, which is, again, the current time plus 2 seconds. So let's play around in our spawn letters to get our letters to actually spawn. All right, so this is where we actually create a new letter. So we're going to grab our game object, which is our letter object. Actually, this is our letter prefab. We're really just creating a new letter here. And what this is doing, this variable, is it's storing the letter prefab. And instantiation, what this is this code word actually instantiates or spawns that letter prefab in our scene. And it sets it to the position of whatever this letter spawner is, which remember is just below our cloud, and the same rotation, because we're going to be using that drop axis or the y-axis to make the letters drop. And if just to kind of show you what I'm talking about, this is our letter spawner script. And if you remember, we have it as a child, that's why it looks indented here, of this cloud. So as this cloud moves, which we have to script that as well, the letters are going to spawn out, and then our little guy here has to run back and forth and grab those letters. So let's return to writer and continue coding. All right, so what I want to do is I want to randomly choose a letter from that word example. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to randomly choose a letter from the current word or alphabet. And the thing is, what's nice about the alphabet is because we can use that for power-ups if we want to use a different letter or something. But we're creating a character. This is just storing a character that's going to be pulled from this getRandomLetter method. So let's go ahead and create that random method. So I'm going to do void, and then I'm going to just grab this getRandomLetter here, and for now just do an open and close curly brace like that. And now we have access to that. Now, actually, you know what? This I think has to be of type char, because we're returning a character. That's why this error is here. So we're going to get a character. This is going to create a character for us. And we have this little error here because we haven't typed any code in here. And it's looking for the keyword return to return a character. All right, so let's take a look at this. I created an if statement. And what is it? It's checking. It's looking for a random value, right? Random.value. And what that value is just a random number. And if it's greater than 1/2, that means 50% chance to spawn a letter from the current word. What we're going to do is we're going to return the current word and one of the letters from 0, which means the starting letter, because there's like indices, like E is 0, X is 1, A is so, and there's a current length of this word, right? So the current length of this word is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But it's actually 6 because in programming, your letter starts at 0. So this is 0. E represents 0. This represents 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what it's saying here is we're going to return a from current word an index, which is from 0 to the current word length, which is 6. So it might be 2 or whatever. So what this code does is it's looking for a random value. As long as it's greater than 50%, it's going to return a letter. All right, so I added a second statement in here. This is my else here. And what this is doing is it's just checking if, let me put this above this, just to kind of break it up. I mean, we could leave it to the side, but this else statement is just checking. It's not checking, but it's generating a random letter up to 26 characters, which really is just A plus a random range of letters from char, so from our library. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And looks pretty good. I think one thing I want to change now that I think about it is back in our letter script here. I don't want this to be a UGUI. I just want it to be Text Mesh Pro because I'm thinking about these things falling from the sky, and I want them to be in world space. And user interface UGUI is tying it to that user interface, and I want it to be tied to the world itself. So I'm just going to delete this UGUI here and just delete that out. And there's one other thing we need to change, and that's on the component itself so that it's a Text Mesh Pro and not a UGUI component. So just delete those two out. Everything else should be good. We shouldn't have any errors there. And then back inside of here in our letter prefab, you see this component here? Yours probably says UGUI. I just kind of switched it out. But what you're going to do is, let me remove this for a second. You're going to add a component, and instead of this Text Mesh Pro Text UI, you're just going to add this component here. And let's save that. And let's go back to our script really quick. Our letter spawner. It should work now, but the problem is we're not going to see it in our scene. And that's because of the reason I made that change. So if you look over here, you'll notice that actually our entire canvas is back here, but our player object is all the way on like -409 in the Z, which is really weird. So here's our cloud. Let's make that 0 on the Z. I think when I dragged it in, it snapped them. And the same thing, we're going to grab our letter text and check that. It looks like it's on Z. It's 0 on the Z. Let's hit F to focus, but you'll notice it's all the way up here, and it's kind of centered in the middle. And I think the reason for that is which is good, I want that, is this is set to, oh no, it's set to the left and the side. So I want it to be middle and then center. And let's just go ahead and hit T in there to see how big that text is. Now, if you look at the position, it says 230 and 152. If we zero this out, you can see now we're in the center here. And this is important because if I would have left this alone, let me go ahead and press play. Notice that I'm going to apply the override and delete it. But like, here's our letter, right? So we have this letter T in here. I'm going to go ahead and go up here and hit apply all. And then I'm going to delete this. And this applied it down here. So now it's no longer in my scene. And we're going to be spawning in this letter prefab here, which is that letter T. But look where it spawns my letter when I press play. Oh, it spawned it right there from that position. Okay, beautiful. And I think the problem I was thinking about is if we were using that UI component. Now, part of this problem is down here, I think 36 is too big. You could drag it in here to kind of see how it looks. I'm also going to just center this to the world, 0 and 0, so we could see a little bit better. I also want to play with the size of this box here. Let's see if we can get it. So let's see. If I hit T, can we get this to translate so that it's kind of, let's move this down a little bit like this. Let's move this. Nope. I guess we could just drag this, kind of confine it a little bit, and then zero out the X and Y position again. I'm going to hit F to focus so we can see this a little bit better. Looks like it's way out here on the Z position too, which is not what I want. But let's just keep kind of giving it like that. And then that letter is really huge. Let's bring that down. So we only want it to be about there. And we can do cool stuff in here, like we can add an outline and make that pretty thick. And let's say we want that outline to be, I don't know, orange or something, so it stands out a little bit better. And I thought the outline, we could have made it on the outside. It looks like it's insetting the outline. So, and let's make this underlay. Maybe that'll make it pop a little bit more. Anyway, as long as you're making the change, if you make the changes out here, you have to always hit apply all, and then just delete this, and then let's press play. It should be falling from the clouds, that position we were talking about. There we go. Bloop. But I also think it's going to have issues because it's not going to collide if our text. Oh, you know what? Our cloud, here, I'm going to hit F to focus, is here. But our letter spawner is registering the position of our cloud. So if I drag this off, you'll notice that, let's hit F to focus on our letter spawner. And, oh, also our text is, let's drag that back into here into this world. We need to set this, we just got to play with this position here, make sure that it's centered and that really want this to be sitting against our canvas. I'm going to grab this, make sure it's under our canvas there, and then I'll zero that out. There we go. Okay, so that was the main cusp of our issue. And again, I'm going to hit T, or you can click here and just shrink that down and then zero these out. Sorry, I know that was a little bit longer than an explanation for something that's a little simple, but you know, we're just kind of working through this. So a little bit bigger letter here for kids to see. We'll go 20. We really should have some cool background art. And then I'm just going to hit overrides, apply all, and I'll delete this out. And then let's press play now. And we have a big T, really big T. So let's see, why is it doing that? I think we'll adjust the, all right, so I figured out what the issue is. It's really, you want to adjust it down here and not into the view because these are conflicting with each other. So what I did is I left these scale all at 1, and then you could play with the font size. So say we go 20 here and I press play. I'm just adjusting it only down here in my project tab. You'll see it fall from here. I'm going to pause it. See, there's our letter 20, and it's falling flat on the surface because this letter text is, we have the position on Z here, and then the X and Y is really just spawning wherever that thing is. So you can just adjust the letter like that. Okay, one last thing I want to do is get it so that it's always switching the letters. And then I know this video is getting a little long, but then in the next tutorial, we'll get into handling collisions with the player kit. All right, so if you recall, we have this set letter method here. This is what actually puts the letter into that slot, into that TextMesh Pro slot. Now in letter spawner here, what I'm going to do is add this little block of code. And what this is doing is, if you remember, we have a game object here called letter that we're storing. This is holding a reference to every letter that's spawned in our scene or instantiated. And when an object is instantiated, you also get whatever the script is attached to it. So do you remember what it's really instantiating here is this letter text prefab. Come on. All right. So what we're instantiating is this letter text prefab in our scene. So make sure actually you also, because sometimes this causes issues too, is we have this TextMesh reference here. It's probably empty for you. Just drag it in there, even though we have that get component function. This will really lock it in. Otherwise, we might have letter errors later. But make sure to drag that in there. And so this is what's being spawned in our scene. And every time it's spawned, we have this letter component. And we want to access this letter component, and we want to update the text being fed inside of there. So back inside of here, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, when we spawn a letter, we're going to get the random letter. Remember, we made this function that makes random letters, you know, either an EXAM LP example or, you know, one A to thing, and then A to Z rather. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, we're going to make a new variable of type letter. That means anything that has a letter script attached, which is really, we're just grabbing this. And we're saying we're going to grab that letter script that's attached to that game object, and we're going to get that letter script component. That's all this is doing. So this is grabbing the script from the object that spawned. And as long as that script is on there, that means not null, we're going to set the letter that's in that script to the letter that's being spawned. Remember, letter spawned is that random letter. So if we look at this, this is the letter script, and we're calling that set letter method. Here's that set letter, and we're passing in that random letter that's being spawned into here, and that's what's displaying it on the scene. So let's save this. Let's go back into our Unity project. And now when we press play, we should have a random letter and not T. So there's an L, there's an E, there's another E, there's an A. So, and remember, the word that we're trying to spell is example. But we haven't written any of the logic yet that handles like if example is the same or if we've collected all the letters. So that's it for now.